Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to examine the legal possibility of Chris Watts relying on a trial by media defense. Now, at some point in time, almost all high-profile criminal cases do rely on the trial by media defense. It's kind of a default characteristic of any high-profile case is that they are associated with media saturation. They are associated with intense levels of scrutiny in the media and also social media. And I do think as time goes by, you're going to have also the idea of trial by social media. I think that is going to come up more and more in high-profile true crime, including, let's call it, trial by YouTube, trial by Twitter, trial by Facebook. And a couple of examples of that, I think, for example, in the Letitia Stalk case, I think quite a lot played out on social media before things like arrests and so on, such as, especially on Facebook. Of course, what's important to note there is that Letitia Stalk herself participated in that, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't pursue that angle, but if you participate in the media circus, then it tends to show that you can't be that, not necessarily of course, but it tends to show that you can't be that opposed to the media. It's much easier to sketch the whole scenario that you're a victim of the media if you never participate. In other words, you never give any interviews, right? And obviously that applies in this case. But just to kind of in a general way refresh your memories, the trial by media defense has been cited or used by, for example, Amanda Knox, Jodi Arias, Casey Anthony, O.J. Simpson, Oscar Pistorius, Madeleine McCann's parents, and in the JonBenét Ramsey case. I'm just going to quickly go through just a couple of points on each of those high-profile cases before we get to Chris Watts. Now, what is very interesting and kind of ironic with some of those cases, especially Amanda Knox, Oscar Pistorius, Madeleine McCann, and JonBenét Ramsey, is that in a lot of those cases, on the one hand, you argue, wow, we're victims of the media. On the other hand, you actually hire public relations people to engage with the media to sort of sell a kind of story and a kind of version and a kind of image. So in other words, you actively are recruiting the media and engaging with the media, with experts, to shape the narrative, to shape whatever story you want to do, right? So, and that may be done to some extent behind the scenes, right? And then very publicly you sort of talk about how I've suffered because of the media. Meanwhile, a lot of these people have written books and appeared in the media excessively, if that's the word. They've volunteered and participated in documentaries, all documentaries that make them look good, but at the same time they're victims of the media. In reality, the media has really helped them to restore their image, to rehabilitate them in many ways. In the Amanda Knox case, she would complain, for example, that she was sexualized in the media. Foxy Noxy was something that reporters came up with. That's not true. The Foxy Noxy thing was something, I think she was called by her classmates and then she took upon that name. And she even described herself. She had a profile, Foxy Noxy, on MySpace. So I'm just saying it's a little bit disingenuous sometimes of people in these high profile cases to cry foul, to say, oh, I don't know why the media is saying this about me. Another example is Jodi Arias. We also know that she participated in media interviews. And Casey Anthony, that was just a very high-profile case. I don't remember her participating very much, but certainly her parents did. In the O.J. Simpson case, the situation was slightly different because, in the sense that the trial by media kind of actually helped him, in the sense of the Rodney King beating sort of made it very clear, certainly to a large swathe of the population, that the police could be quite unfair to people of a certain race. And so in that sense, trial by media, you could argue, helped him. I'm not sure whether the prosecution could then rely on that in a way to say, okay, this person was acquitted because of trial by media, well, let's now have another trial. Legally, that would certainly be an interesting situation. Anyway, Oscar Pistorius is another interesting example. I'm not going to talk too much about that, although there's a lot that one can say. But in that case, for example, a critical piece of evidence, by far the most important piece of evidence in that case, which is the door through which he shot the victim, that was, photos of that door was sort of leaked to the media. And they actually had to remove that door from the crime scene because they were afraid someone would steal it. And it was kind of a weird situation because the door itself had been destroyed in a way. Oscar himself had smashed through that door with a cricket bat, and so the door had to be reassembled almost like pieces of a puzzle. And so they had to find the splinters and the fragments of that door and put them back together in order to reconstruct the situation in court. And that very door did appear in court. And what was quite interesting was that some pieces were still missing, small pieces, slivers of wood that were either lost or that may have been flushed down the toilet. And anyway, the fact that Sky News actually leaked this evidence was quite interesting and kind of quite concern. And large sums of money, of course, were paid. Did it affect the trial? It sort of did. It was quite a long process before Oscar was finally convicted of murder, and the trial by media, in a way, has actually supported his case that it was an accident. For example, in the last documentary, Madeleine McCann's parents attended I can't quite remember the name of it, but there was a kind of a trial, a broad trial, where the British media were being examined. I think it was the Leveson inquiry or something. And then the McCanns attended this, and I remember Kate McCann, I think, complained that her diary was stolen and that they serialized it or something like that. And then I think later on she wrote a book and referred to her diary in it. So, you could sort of argue, is it so bad if somebody doesn't want to be in the media, but then they write a book and they refer to their own diary in it? You could also argue, well, was it by accident that the diary was, how can I put it, made available or found its way into the hands of the media? You would think that if it did land in the media by accident, then they could simply just sue the media and they wouldn't be able to do anything. I'm a little bit rusty on exactly what happened there, because maybe they did sue them, but all I'm saying is it's quite simple. If somebody takes your information and without being authorized, you can easily prevent them, right? You can cease and desist kind of thing. But again, the McCanns are very well known for hiring a slew of public relations personnel, and were very well known to the journalists, just having this very slick public relations campaign. And you would sort of wonder why, when you're looking for your daughter, is your sort of first port of call kind of public relations. And you kind of had a similar situation with Amanda Knox, one of the first people that was hired was, I think, David Marriott, right? Why is that the first port of call? And you have a similar situation in the JonBenet Ramsey case. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but what is quite interesting is the JonBenet Ramsey case was a case that really deserved a lot of scrutiny. It deserved transparency, because if there's a case that casts the law in Colorado in doubt, how can I put it, the efficacy of the justice system in Colorado in doubt, it's the JonBenet Ramsey case. It's a case that's where a legal result has been frustrated, delayed, postponed, contrived, and all this kind of thing. And I remember very early on when the Chris Watts case was appearing to be becoming a very high-profile case, just in the back of my mind thinking, just in a general way, I wonder whether something similar is going to happen in this case in terms of the legal shenanigans. In other words, in the same way that the JonBenet Ramsey case looked like it was going to be this incredible trial, and they never even went to trial, the exact same thing happened with the Chris Watts case. And for somewhat different reasons. I think there are different reasons why, in terms of the Ramsey case, there were certain people who didn't want it to go to trial, and then there were also certain legal impediments. In the Watts case, I think there were other issues where certain vested interests wouldn't have wanted to be exposed in a trial, and it had nothing to do with Chris Watts' resources. It maybe had something to do with other people's resources. And I think there were quite a few other complicated issues involved as well. And just in terms of this whole idea of trial by media, I think some of those interests didn't want to be put on trial, right? Some people will probably know what I'm talking about. So that's just kind of a background. Now we get to, just the merits of this particular video. Could Chris Watts use the idea of media bias, the impact of television and online news coverage, to argue that his trial was tainted? Could he claim that the media and even social media, especially in Colorado, created a widespread perception of his guilt? And there's some interesting concepts to kind of go into, because you could argue that Shanann's social media tended to exonerate him. If the case did go to trial, one of his best witnesses may have been Shanann herself, just in terms of her saying he's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Even her parents said something like that in some of their interviews. And there were a lot of people that just didn't have a bad word to say about Chris Watts. And that really would have been kind of to his advantage in a jury situation. I think a jury may have liked him and even sympathized with him. It's difficult to say. Some people may have absolutely hated him and nothing would have diverted them from that position. But I think some may have felt differently. And you may have even had a hung jury on whatever the case was, as you had with Jodi Arias. In Jodi Arias' case, although so many people absolutely loathed her, if that's not a euphemism, you had at least one jury member who kind of sympathized with her. And that's all you kind of needed in a case with Chris Watts. And let's face it, in the audience out there, although there are many that hate Chris Watts with a passion, there definitely are sympathizers and even some women who appear to be in love with him or infatuated with him. So first of all, yes, there was some misreporting of the case, and some people would argue that is deliberate or something. I think we've all seen it on social media where it looks like something is the case and then someone will jump the gun. So a good example is, I think it was Suzanne Morphew. She was missing, and then suddenly the investigation sort of showed some activity, and a lot of sort of black vehicles pulled up. I think it was near the construction site, and some YouTubers sort of declared Suzanne Morphew's remains found. And although it looked very likely, and although all the circumstances seemed to point to that, it simply wasn't true. And so in that case, it wasn't someone maliciously trying to lie. They were just trying to scoop the story, right? In other words, it wasn't someone who didn't think that that was the case. They genuinely did think that was the case. So in the same case with this particular media, in this case, I think it's ABC. I don't think that they intentionally misrepresented it. I think they genuinely believed that was the case, and in this case they were actually right. Chris Watts did eventually confess to killing his wife and daughters. In fact, he did it in court on the 6th, and again to the agents in a Dodge Correctional 3 months later in mid-February. So that is kind of why this is really odd, is if it was so bad what was misreported, then he ends up confessing it anyway. So in other words, the misreporting ended up being accurate. Now, I think how this actually happened was that the two sources that are referred to in the article, who else could they be other than Coder and Lee? I mean, they were the people in the middle of the cubicle doing the whole interrogation. So it could be something like this, that the media were under the impression that the two agents spoke to somebody, and they are effectively, they're not referenced directly, but they are effectively the sources. I'm speculating. I don't know how this media figured out what they figured out, but probably a cop somewhere along the line mumbled something about what was going on, and the media then put two and two together, and they weren't wrong. It just wasn't technically, officially the right time to announce this. And let's face it, although Watts didn't confess to killing his daughters, everybody believed that he did. I mean, even us watching the interrogation, you can kind of see that what happened, that they put the idea in his mind. All they really wanted to get to was the point where he would acknowledge that they weren't alive anymore, right? And then just to get the interrogation up a level from the level of denying everything. And that's how they kind of got to that point, was by victim blame, offering him the sort of exit or loophole that didn't Shanann do something, kind of thing. So anyway, the bottom line is there was some misreporting of the case, and you've heard the channel Revelation in the Reckoning pointing out when this happened, and you can see that it happens on August the 15th at 8 minutes to 9 in the evening, although the same article is updated at 2:28 p.m. on August the 17th, although again that is before it actually was in court, so I don't think that really even matters. But the point is that this was reported as fact long before it was actually legally sort of declared as fact. So that is kind of an issue. As early as August 15th, some news media reported that Watts had confessed to murdering his wife and the children, and they include Denver 7, who even in their banner on television was saying, husband confesses to killing wife and kids. That was viewed over, I think, 48,000 times. And so he was formally charged 2 days later. So he was charged with the murders of his wife and children, and at that point he didn't really respond. right? He didn't admit anything. It was only on November 6th that Watts formally admitted guilt on all charges, including killing his daughters. Now, the trial by media challenge falls a little flat, to put it mildly, when one considers what he was falsely accused of. What he was falsely accused of, he later admitted guilt on. So, it's not really a false accusation, is it? It's not really a false statement when he's admitted guilt on it. What about the media reports influencing the trial? Did it pressurize him? So, for example, this article on ABC 15 and on Denver 7 on television, what actual impact did it have on Chris Watts? Did it influence him? Did he feel pressurized? Did he feel under duress or coerced by the attention of the media and the public? Because these are legally defensible and actionable things. If you feel like you are pressured or coerced, or you're under duress, or any of these things, then you can argue that, well, I can't really make this decision. I'm not volunteering it. I don't have the free will to do this. I'm kind of forced to do it. Right? Any kind of contract, any legal contract where you are kind of forced, you sort of got someone twisting your arm behind your back or putting a gun to your head, that's not a legally enforceable contract. In any event, when he was in court, he had the opportunity to talk about this aspect. He had the opportunity to address this very thing. And that is what I think he fails to recognize, and also his sympathizers fail to recognize, is in line 1 of the November 6th court transcript, which is page 16, Watts was asked, has anybody put any pressure on you to do this? There it is. Now you have the opportunity to say, you know what, someone reported something about me that wasn't true. And if he had a good lawyer, he probably would have brought it up, or would have known to bring it up. Instead, he had public defenders. And interestingly, there is a point, and you can find it in the discovery, where Ronnie, I think, is about to enter the cubicle the second time, or he's leaving it, and he sort of talks to Coda and he says, can we talk about getting my son a lawyer, but not a public defender? And I think Coda sort of corrals him out, and yes, we'll deal with it later. But that is what Chris Watts needed, not a public defender, someone who really knew his thing, just in terms of getting a proper, in inverted commas, legal defense. But of course, those are expensive. So anyway, when Watts was asked, did anybody put pressure on you, he answered, no. And when you read through the entire 21-page transcript, it feels very like he's saying exactly what is expected of him and exactly what the court sort of wants to hear, without any exception. All of it is yes sir, no sir, saying exactly what they want to hear. And then it's taken him about 2 years to realize, oh, I actually didn't feel that way. It reminds one a little bit of maybe when he got married. In the beginning he did what he was told, and then later on he realized, wow, that's not really what I want. But then whose fault is that? So the answer is Watts will very likely try to rely on trial by media as part of his attempt to argue merits for an appeal. It's also very likely his own role and his own words, including in the Sermon on the Porch that he volunteered to give the media. And he spoke to them for 15 minutes. As well as the book he participated in, will pour cold water on efforts to wriggle out of his legal conundrum. So I'm not going to take it any further than that. if you're interested in the trial by media subject, I guess I could do a series on YouTube going through specific high profile cases, if you guys are interested in it, because it is quite interesting. It is interesting to look at what is leaked, what did influence public perception, and you could argue, well, wasn't it right anyway? In other words, wasn't this thing that was leaked, wasn't it damaging anyway? So in other words, yes, it does influence public perception, but shouldn't public perception have been leaked? But then you could also argue that some things are leaked that change public perception when they perhaps shouldn't. Can you think of any instances of that? Once again, don't forget, in 2 days' time, on Thursday, the 10th of December, I'll be starting the timeline review of the JonBenet Ramsey case. That would be under hashtag 24 years ago today, JonBenet on Twitter. So check that out. Check that out at Crime Rocket on Twitter. And I'll also be doing a short video just looking at Amanda Knox's body language and some of the things she said in a recent reaction to Rudy Gaudet being released from prison. So look out for that. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.